The salesman at Crescent Auto had no idea they were watching the final move of a 4-year game. Neither did I, fully. Not until I picked up that pen. I had been in that dealership before, twice. The first time was just to look, to confirm the car was still exactly what I remembered. The second time was 3 weeks ago, to arrange everything quietly, registration, insurance, the specific paperwork sequence that would keep the title exactly where I needed it until I decided otherwise. That second visit, I told the floor manager my name is Desaline Gibson, that I was a senior loan officer at Fidelity Trust, and that I did not need financing. He stopped talking and started listening. That is usually how it goes. This morning, the morning of my daughter Shalene's birthday party, I was back to sign the final documents. The salesman, a young man named Trey, with an eager handshake, slid the folder across the desk like he was presenting something fragile. I opened it without ceremony. 15 years of approving mortgages, restructuring accounts, and closing bad loans will do that to a woman. Paper does not impress me. What is written on it does. I moved through each page. Initial here, sign there, date, witness line. Trey kept congratulating me between pages the way young people do when they cannot read a room. She's going to love it. I smiled without looking up. I know she will. And I did know. I had known since Shalene was 19 years old, sitting cross-legged on my living room floor with a glossy magazine open across her knees. She had pressed her finger against a photograph of a silver Lexus ES and said, "Mama," one day. Not to me specifically. Just out loud, the way young people announce their dreams to whatever room will hold them. I had looked at her from the kitchen doorway and said nothing. But I remembered. I always remembered everything about my children. That was the version of me that walked into this dealership this morning. The mother who remembered. I want you to understand that, because the woman telling you this story now is not entirely the same person. Something shifted between that showroom and the parking lot of that party venue. I will get to that. My phone vibrated once against the desk. I turned it over. A message from my younger daughter, Sandra. "Everything's in place. I'm ready when you are." I read it twice. Set the phone face down. Kept signing. Trey handed me the final copy of the registration in a sealed envelope. "Should I put a bow on the windshield?" I looked at him for a moment. "No," I said. "She'll know what it means without one." I drove the car out of the lot myself. My own vehicle left temporarily with the dealership's valet arrangement. The Lexus handled exactly the way I expected. Smooth, precise, no resistance. The drive to the party venue took 11 minutes. Before I go any further, if you're watching this, drop the time in the comments. I want to know what hour of the day my story found you. I turned into the venue parking lot and immediately saw Leroy's black Tahoe parked near the entrance. Not in a guest spot. Positioned. The way a man parks when he believes the space belongs to him. I cut the engine. Sat for a moment with both hands still on the wheel. 4 years. Let's finish this. I have walked into hundreds of rooms in my life and read them before I crossed the threshold. Loan officers learn that early. The temperature of a space, who holds the weight in it, who is performing comfort they do not actually feel. That skill saved me professionally more times than I can count. Walking into Shalene's birthday party, it saved me something else entirely. The venue was a private dining room at a restaurant she liked. Warm lighting, round tables dressed in cream and gold. About 30 guests already settled into the ease of a Saturday afternoon. Music low enough for conversation. A bar cart near the back wall. Everything tasteful. Everything paid for, I noted, with money that had passed through my hands at some point upstream. Shalene was near the center of the room when I walked in. She was laughing at something a woman beside her had said, her head tilted back, one hand pressed lightly to her collarbone the way she had done since she was a teenager. She was beautiful. She has always been beautiful. I want to be clear about that, not because it excuses anything, but because it matters that I saw her fully even then. Not as a problem, not as a disappointment, as my daughter. Even knowing what I knew, she spotted me and her face opened, not gradually, immediately. She crossed the room and pulled me into a hug that felt real, not performed, real. She smelled like the perfume I bought her last Christmas, the one she said she was saving for something special. "You look amazing, Mama." I held her a moment longer than the moment required, not clinging, just holding. "So do you, baby. Happy birthday." When I stepped back, there was a flicker, small enough that most people would have missed it. Her eyes moved past me for a fraction of a second, then returned. Not avoidance, not fear, just a check. The kind people make when they are aware of something else in the room they have not yet named out loud. Then it was gone. I was still holding her hand when I saw Leroy. He was working the far side of the room, hand resting easily on a man's shoulder, laughing at exactly the right moment, drink held loosely like a man without anything pressing on him. He had a gift. I will give him that. He could make any room feel like it had always been waiting for him. 4 years of watching him do it had not made it less effective. It had only made it easier to read. He turned and saw me. The smile came immediately. Practiced. Warm enough to carry across a room. But I have spent too many years watching faces arrive at expressions to miss the half-second before it settles. In that half-second, there was a shift. Not surprise, not discomfort. Adjustment. The look of a man confirming that something he had already accounted for had now taken its place. He crossed the room with his hand extended. "Desaline, glad you made it." I took his hand. Held it 1 beat longer than comfortable. Not long enough to draw attention, just long enough to register. Leroy. Wouldn't miss it. His eyes moved once, toward the window facing the parking lot. I had already noted which window showed the Lexus. He looked back at me and smiled again. I returned it. Anyone watching would have seen 2 people being polite. Nothing more. Near the back, I noticed Bertie, my neighbor of 14 years, seated at a table with 2 women from the block. She caught my eye. She did not smile. She held my gaze just long enough to say something without speaking it. The kind of look a woman gives when she has seen enough small things over time to recognize when they are about to become one large one. I gave her a slight nod. She turned back to her table. A little while later, Shalene pulled me aside near the hallway. She took my hand in both of hers and squeezed. "Thank you for coming, Mama." Her voice was softer here. Lower. Not meant for the room. I looked at her closely. Not searching for evidence. Searching for truth. For something that had not been coached, not been shaped, not been placed there by someone else's influence. Some hesitation. Some flicker of the girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder and trust the world to hold while she rested. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw it. Then it settled. Not gone, just covered. I did not press. I squeezed her hand back. "I would never miss your birthday." And I meant every word. Someone had propped the restaurant doors open, and the afternoon light was sitting flat and gold across the parking lot when I led the guests outside. 30 people arranging themselves in a loose half-circle the way people do when they sense something worth watching is about to happen. The Lexus sat exactly where I had parked it. Silver. Clean. A white envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. The registration, in Shalene's name, pending my signature. I had placed it there myself before walking inside. A detail nobody noticed. Details rarely get noticed until it is too late. I stepped aside and let the car speak first. Shalene saw it and her whole face changed. Not performed, genuine. Her hand came up to cover her mouth and her eyes went bright in the way I remembered from Christmas mornings when she was 7 years old. She said, "Mama," in a voice that had no calculation in it. Just feeling. Just her. For 4 seconds, she was entirely herself. The girl who pressed her finger against a magazine photograph and said one day to an empty room. I watched those 4 seconds, like a woman watching the last of something. Then, her eyes found Leroy. He was standing slightly behind the group, arms folded, and he gave her the smallest nod. Barely a movement. The kind of signal that only works between two people who have rehearsed what comes next. Shalene lowered her hand from her mouth, straightened, and when she looked at me again, something behind her eyes had been switched off. "Thank you for the new car, Mama." Her voice was even, warm enough for the audience around her. "But if you truly want me to be happy, leave us alone. You're not family." The words arrived the way a blade does. You do not feel the cut immediately. You feel the cold first. Leroy laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a laugh that tried to soften anything. A full, settled laugh. The laugh of a man who had been waiting a long time for a specific satisfaction and was finally collecting it. He lifted his glass slightly, like a toast. Around him, the guests rearranged their faces. 2 women near the back stepped closer to each other. A man I did not recognize looked at the ground. Near the far edge of the group, Bertie stood completely still, her eyes on me. Not on Shalene, not on Leroy, on me. She could not hold my gaze. She looked away first. 30 pairs of eyes. Every one of them waiting to see what I would do. I stood in that parking lot for exactly 3 seconds. I counted them the way I count everything, quietly, precisely, without letting it show on my face. Then I smiled, not because I was hurt and hiding it, not because I was holding myself together. I smiled because the thing I had come here to finish was finished. Every document, every arrangement, every quiet decision made over 4 years was already in motion. They just did not know it yet. "Enjoy the car, baby." I turned and walked to my own vehicle. The dealership had returned it to the lot that morning, parked 3 spaces from the Lexus. I got in. I did not look in the rearview mirror. That was the last time they saw that version of me. The woman who would walk into any room, absorb anything, and smile on the way out because she still believed love was enough. I buried her in that parking lot. What walked out was something else entirely. I did not cry. I picked up my phone and dialed. 1 ring. Sandra answered. "It's done," I said. "Go." The drive took 23 minutes. I know because I counted those too. No music, no phone calls beyond the one already made, just the road and the particular quiet that settles over a person when something long and heavy has finally been set down. I want to tell you what those 4 years looked like from the inside. The first time I met Leroy Greer was at a dinner Shalene arranged at a restaurant she could not yet afford. He stood when I walked in, good manners, well-practiced, pulled out my chair, called me ma'am twice in the first 5 minutes. Charming, fluent in the language of making older women feel respected. But then he said something that stopped me cold. Shalene had mentioned casually that I worked in banking. And Leroy leaned across the table with that easy smile and said, "A woman like you must know exactly how to make money disappear when it needs to." He laughed immediately after, made it a joke. Shalene laughed too. I smiled and said nothing, but I heard it. 30 years in finance teaches you that the truest things people mean arrive dressed as humor. I drove home that night and sat at my kitchen table for a long time, not panicking, thinking. The way I think before I decline a loan application, carefully, without emotion, based entirely on what the numbers are telling me. He had the profile, charming, financially vague, uncomfortable with documentation, a man who wanted proximity to resources he had not earned. I had approved and rejected enough people in my career to know the type before they finished their first sentence. So I did what I do. I started quietly. The house was the first thing. 18 months ago, I contacted a private real estate agent, not anyone connected to our neighborhood, not anyone Shalene might encounter, and listed the property discreetly. That address had my name on it in his mind. Every asset attached to my name was a potential instrument in whatever he was building. I needed to remove them one by one without disturbing the surface. The sale finalized 2 weeks before the party. The new property, smaller, in a different part of the city, was purchased outright under a family trust. He had never heard referenced in 4 years of dinners and holidays and careful conversation. He did not know it existed. That was the point. The mortgage came next. When Shalene and Leroy needed a co-signer 2 years ago, I agreed. What I did not explain was the specific clause I had my attorney embed in the arrangement, a fraud disclosure requirement. If fraudulent activity was ever detected connected to the origination documents, the lender had full grounds to issue formal notice and initiate review. Leroy signed without reading past the first page. Men who rely on charm rarely read the fine print. 6 weeks ago, I called Lysander Mountain and restructured my estate. The will was rewritten. The protected trust was established. Whatever Leroy had planned to reach for when the time came, he would find nothing there with his name near it. The car title I kept in my name from the beginning. I always intended to give it to Shalene, just not while his hands were on everything she owned. I pulled up to a pale gray house on a quiet street and cut the engine. Before I reached the door, it opened. Sandra stood in the frame, still in her Saturday clothes, her eyes reading my face the way only a child who knows you completely can. "Is everything ready?" I asked. "Everything," she said. I stepped inside. "Then we have 48 hours. Sandra's kitchen table was not large, but we had made it work. Documents arranged in 3 columns, what had already been filed, what was scheduled, what was waiting on a single phone call. Lysander Mountain had been on standby since midday. The compliance department at Fidelity Trust had received the preliminary filing 2 hours before the party even started. The mortgage lender had a call locked in for 7 the next morning. Sandra sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a mug she had stopped drinking from. She was watching me the way she had watched me her whole life, quietly, without demanding anything, just present. That girl has never needed to fill silence with noise. It is one of the things I love most about her. I was reviewing the 3rd column when my phone lit up on the table between us. Shalene. Sandra saw it the same moment I did. The kitchen went completely still. I looked at the screen for a long moment. Shalene's name sitting there, pulsing. I thought about the parking lot, the speech, the 4 seconds before the nod. I thought about her hand squeezing mine in that hallway and her voice saying, "Thank you for coming." Mama, like she meant it, because part of her did. That was always the complicated truth about Shalene. She could mean 2 things at once and believe both of them. I answered, "Mama." Her voice was different from the one she had used in that parking lot. Smaller, the edges gone. She said she was calling to check on me, that things had gotten out of hand, that she hoped I understood she did not mean for it to go the way it went. She did not say, "sorry." She circled it the way people circle the thing they cannot bring themselves to land on. She talked for almost 2 minutes without asking me a single question. I listened to all of it. When she finished, the line was quiet. I could hear her breathing, waiting, needing to know the door was still where she had left it. "I love you," I said. "I always have." I ended the call. Sandra was staring at me from across the table. Her mug was still. Her eyes were asking the question her mouth had not formed yet. "What are you going to do?" she finally said. I picked up the document sitting at the top of the first column, uncapped my pen, signed it with the same steady hand I had used at the dealership that morning. "Everything I planned to do," I said. Sandra exhaled slowly. Not relief, exactly. More like a woman who had been holding something on behalf of someone else and had just been told she could set it down. We worked for another hour, quietly, efficiently, the way the two of us have always operated when something needed doing without ceremony. Then my phone rang again. Lysander Mountain. I put him on speaker. He spoke for 40 seconds. When he finished, I did not respond immediately. I set my pen down on the table. Flat. Deliberate. Sandra watched my face. I have been delivering and receiving hard information for 30 years. I know how to hear something without letting it move across my face. But whatever Lysander had just told me, something Leroy had done, that I had not uncovered in 4 years of careful watching. It moved. Just slightly. Just enough for Sandra to see it. "Mama," she said quietly. "What did he say?" I looked at my daughter across the table, and for the first time that entire day, I did not answer immediately. Lysander's words sat in the middle of that kitchen like something that had been dropped and could not be picked back up. I repeated them to Sandra slowly, not because I needed time to understand them. I had already done that in the silence before I spoke. I repeated them slowly because she deserved to receive them cleanly, without my reaction shaping what they were. The facts were enough. They did not need anything added to them. Leroy had been using Sandra's identity, not recklessly, not in a way that would draw immediate attention. The way these things are done when the person doing them intends to stay in place for a long time, carefully, in fragments, through access that looks like trust. Her information had been used as a secondary reference on accounts she did not control. Her name appeared on a small line of credit tied to an address she had never lived at. An application had been submitted in her name that never fully completed, just enough to create a record, not enough to trigger a full alert. Nothing large enough to set off alarms on its own. But patterns do not announce themselves all at once. They build. Over time, those small entries begin to lean in one direction. A missed verification here, a flagged inconsistency there. Enough to lower a score quietly, enough to make approvals take longer, enough to create friction that feels like bad luck until it stops being luck. He had not been trying to take from her all at once. He had been positioning her. If Sandra's financial record became unstable, even slightly, she would be occupied, confused, trying to understand why something that had always been steady suddenly required explanation. And while she was doing that, she would not be looking anywhere else. 2 daughters, 2 directions, neither one aware the other was being moved. Sandra listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she said, "How did he get my information?" I did not answer immediately. "How did he get my information?" she asked again. And this time I watched the question answer itself before I could speak. The guest book Shalene kept at her parties, full names, phone numbers, addresses written out in clear hand. The family contact sheet Leroy had circulated 2 years ago, presented as something responsible in case of emergencies. The afternoon Sandra had used Shalene's laptop to check her banking app, not thinking twice about who else had ever sat at that same machine. Small things, ordinary things. left in the open because no one had a reason to guard them. Collected by a man who treated information the way other men treat cash, something to be stored, arranged, and used when the moment required it. "Shalene," Sandra said, not sharply, not accusing, just the name, landing where it had always been leading. She was not angry. That was the part that shifted something in me. She was ashamed. Ashamed that she had not seen it. Ashamed that she had handed over pieces of herself without understanding what they could become in someone else's hands. Ashamed that she had sat at tables with him, passed him plates, asked him how his day had been, while he was building something around her that she could not see. She put her face in her hands. I let her. Some things do not need to be interrupted just because they are uncomfortable. They need space to settle into the body before anything can be done with them. When she lifted her head again, her eyes were dry. Sandra has always held her tears inward. It is not strength the way people think of it. It is something quieter than that. I stood and pulled her into me the way I had when she was small, and the world had pressed against her in ways she did not yet have words for. "He picked the wrong family," I said. She held on for a moment. Then she stepped back and straightened. That was all she needed. I sat down and called Lysander. "Add it," I told him. "All of it. The references, the partial applications, the linked accounts. Build the pattern, not the pieces." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Once I formalize this as a pattern, it changes the classification. It moves from irregular activity to intentional misuse. That triggers review at a different level." "I understand," I said. "And once it's submitted, it won't stay contained," he added. "It becomes part of a record that other institutions can see when they run their own checks." "That's fine," I said. "It needs to be seen." I ended the call and looked at Sandra. "He has some time," I said. "Not much, but enough to feel it when things start shifting." Sandra met my eyes without hesitation. "Good," she said. I did not witness what happened the next morning, but I was told. Bertie called me first, at 8:43 before I had finished my second cup of coffee. Then Sandra called an hour later with what she had gathered from a woman on Shalene's street who knew enough to notice and enough to talk. Between the two accounts, I was able to piece together the morning with the kind of clarity that only comes when multiple people are watching the same thing from different angles. Shalene woke up early. That part I did not need to be told. She has always woken early when something is sitting at the edge of her mind. She went to the window the way people go to windows, when they already suspect the answer. The driveway was empty. Bertie said she watched from across the street as Shalene came outside in her housecoat, walked the full length of the driveway, and stood at the curb as though the car might simply reappear if she gave it enough time. It did not. She called the dealership at 9. Bertie could not hear that conversation, but Sandra's contact could see Shalene's face through the front window while she made it. Watched the expression shift from confusion to something harder to name. The dealership would have told her what was true. The vehicle was registered to another party. No transfer had been processed. There was nothing they could do. She called me next. My phone was off. Not blocked. Off. There is a difference, and I imagine Shalene felt it. A blocked call has a particular sound. A phone that is simply off asks nothing of you. It just does not answer. She called 3 times. The third time she did not leave a message. I was told she stood in the kitchen for a while after that. Still. The kind of still that is not calm. Then Leroy came downstairs. This is the part Bertie described most carefully, because she had moved to her front porch by then and had a direct sight line through the Greer's front window. Shalene told him the car was gone. She watched his face when she said it. He did not react the way a man reacts when he hears something he did not expect. There was a pause, brief, controlled, before the performance of surprise arrived. The furrowed brow, the question about calling the police, the arm around her shoulder. All of it one beat too late. Like a man who had already rehearsed the scene and was now delivering it from memory rather than feeling. Shalene registered it. Bertie was certain of that. She said Shalene stepped back from him, just slightly, just half a step. In the middle of his arm, coming around her. Not dramatically. The way a body moves when the mind has noticed something it is not yet ready to examine. She did not examine it. She let him pull her back in. She nodded along to whatever he said next, but that half step was already done. It could not be undone. At 11 o'clock, a courier arrived at their door. Leroy answered it. Signed for the envelope. Shalene was upstairs. Bertie saw her shadow pass the bedroom window just before the courier pulled away. Leroy stood in the kitchen and read the letter from the mortgage lender. Bertie could not see his face from that angle, but she saw what he did when he finished. He folded it carefully, slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket hanging on the chair. Then he called upstairs that he was making breakfast. Lysander called at 2 in the afternoon. Sandra was in the next room. I sat at the kitchen table alone with the phone resting flat in front of me and listened to everything he had assembled. I have received difficult information my entire career without reaction. Foreclosure notices, fraud confirmations, numbers that quietly rearranged people's lives delivered in the same even tone as a weather report. This was different. Not because it was worse than anything I had handled professionally, but because every detail landed twice, once as confirmation. Once as the particular grief of a woman who had spent 4 years being right about something she had hoped, in private, she was wrong about. Leroy had never intended to build anything. That was the foundation of it. From the beginning, he had operated on proximity, not ownership. Access to things he had not earned and did not intend to earn honestly. He moved close to structure, close to stability, close to people whose names carried weight in rooms he could not enter on his own. He had used mine, not loudly, not in a way that could be easily traced back and challenged, but consistently enough that it began to attach. Referencing my position at Fidelity Trust in conversations I was never part of. Letting people assume he understood systems he had only observed from the outside. Borrowing credibility the way some men borrow money, with no intention of returning it, and no concern for what the debt leaves behind. That was his pattern. Not bold moves, repeated ones. Shalene had been the center of that pattern. Her love for him had not been calculated. That was the part he relied on. A woman who loves a man completely does not audit his language, does not question why certain conversations happen behind closed doors, does not stop to examine why explanations always arrive just clear enough to satisfy, but never clear enough to verify. He did not need her to participate. He only needed her to believe. I sat with that for a moment. She had given him certainty, and he had used that certainty as proof to everyone else. 3 months ago, Lysander confirmed the timing. Leroy had consulted a divorce attorney, not because the marriage had broken, because he had decided it had finished its purpose. The next phase had already been planned. Close out what he had built. Position himself cleanly. Leave Shalene carrying whatever remained. Debts tied to her name. Inconsistencies tied to her records. Explanations that would take years to untangle because they had never been clear to begin with. The birthday party had not been an emotional outburst. It had been positioning, a public separation, clean enough that if anything followed, I would be removed from it before I had the chance to step in. If I had responded the way he expected, hurt, reactive, visible, he would have been right. That was his mistake, not arrogance in the way people describe it. overconfidence in a pattern that had worked too many times before. My phone vibrated against the table. Unknown number. I looked at it for a moment and recognized the structure. Not his primary line, but one attached to it. The kind people use when they believe their usual path is being watched. Leroy. I turned the phone face down and let it ring out. He called again, 20 minutes later, then once more. Each time I watched the screen, let it settle, and turned it back over without answering. I did not block the number. "Why not block it?" Sandra asked from the doorway. I didn't look up immediately. "Because a man who thinks the door is closed starts making decisions," I said. "A man who thinks it might still open waits." She leaned against the frame, considering that. "And waiting keeps him where we can see him," she said. I nodded once. Silence settled again. Not empty, just complete. I picked up the phone and called Lysander back. "Does Shalene know about the consultation?" I asked. He paused, not because he needed time to think, but because he understood the weight of the question. "No," he said. "And if he tells her first, it won't be the truth. It'll be whatever version keeps control." I sat with that for a moment. Not long, just long enough to decide. "I know who tells her," I said. And when I ended the call, I already knew exactly how. I told Sandra what I needed from her over breakfast. Not everything, just the outline. One call, one question. Nothing that sounded like a warning. The kind of question a sister asks when she is simply checking in. Casual enough to pass unnoticed. Specific enough to stay behind after the call ends. Sandra listened with both hands around her mug. When I finished, she sat for a moment, letting it settle the way she always does. Then she nodded once and stood. She made the call from the living room. I stayed in the kitchen. I could hear her voice, but not her words. The particular low, even register she uses when she is handling something carefully. I occupied myself with the breakfast dishes and listened to the rhythm of it. Not the content, the shape. There is a difference. The call lasted 4 minutes. I counted. When she came back, she leaned against the doorway and looked at me. "I asked her," she said, "exactly the way you said. And?" She laughed first. Sandra set her phone on the counter. That short laugh people use when something lands closer than they expected. A pause. Then she said everything was fine. Said she and Leroy keep their finances separate. Said she doesn't really go through his paperwork. I dried my hands on the dish towel. But? She went quiet after. Sandra met my eyes. Not confused, just thinking. Like the question didn't leave when the call ended. That was enough. A seed does not need force. It only needs to land in the right place. And Shalene had already shown me, in that driveway, in that half step back, that she was standing in soil that would take it. Lysander called at 11. He did not speak in dramatic terms. He never does. Men who do this work understand that precision matters more than volume. What he told me was this. The filing we had submitted, combined with the additional pattern he documented, had been formally logged and cross-referenced, not acted on in isolation, reviewed alongside activity that had already drawn quiet attention. What we provided did not create the scrutiny. It gave shape to it. That mattered. It meant this was not the beginning of something. It was an escalation. A formal request for clarification had been issued to Leroy Greer's place of employment. Not a charge, not an accusation. A request for documentation and response, structured, official, and recorded. It had been delivered in person. Leroy was not at his desk when it arrived. Someone else signed for it, which meant the envelope had passed through another set of hands before it reached his. Which meant Whether he liked it or not, the privacy he had been operating inside had already started to thin. I set the phone down and sat with that for a moment. Lysander had flagged something else. In the course of reviewing the financial records, a pattern had surfaced. Small transfers, consistent in timing, structured just beneath reporting thresholds. Not large enough to stand out individually, repetitive enough to become visible when viewed together. That was not improvisation. That was habit. And habit does not begin where you first notice it. It means there is more behind it than what you can currently see. Whoever the third party was, it extended the scope beyond what sat inside our family. It meant there were additional records, additional accounts, additional places where the same pattern might exist. It meant this would not be resolved quietly. Sandra had come back into the kitchen. She was watching my face. "The request reached his office," I said. "Not him. Someone else handled it first." She absorbed that without reaction. "He'll be aware of it soon," I added. "And once he is, he'll have to decide how to respond before anyone else decides for him." "What if he runs?" she asked. I looked at her. At this quiet, steady woman who had carried every part of this beside me without asking for recognition, without needing explanation, without once stepping out of line with what needed to be done. "If he runs," I said, "then he answers every question without saying a word." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. "Good," she said. I was on Sandra's back porch when Shalene's world came apart. I did not know it in real time. I pieced it together afterward, from Bertie, from Sandra's contact on the street, from the particular sequence of events that arranges itself into clarity once all the accounts arrive. But sitting on that porch, in the early morning with coffee going cold in my hands, I felt something shift. Not dramatically, the way pressure changes before weather does. Sandra came out and sat beside me without a word. She did not ask how I was. She did not fill the quiet with anything. She simply brought her own coffee and sat close enough that our shoulders were almost touching, and let the morning be what it was. I want to tell you what that felt like. To finally set down something you have been carrying alone for 4 years. It does not feel like victory. It feels like the first full breath after a very long time of breathing around something lodged in your chest. The morning was ordinary. Birds, a neighbor's sprinkler somewhere down the block, Sandra's quiet presence beside me, and underneath all of it, the particular piece of a woman who has done what needed doing and is no longer waiting for anything. I did not know then what Shalene was doing in that same hour. She woke early again. That part came from Bertie, who had resumed her position of quiet observation without being asked. Shalene moved through her morning the way a person moves when they are trying to hold the shape of a normal day by force of will alone. Coffee, the window, the empty driveway she already knew would be empty but looked at anyway. She did laundry. That detail arrived from Sandra's contact, and it is the one that stayed with me longest. Of everything Shalene could have done that morning, she did laundry. The most ordinary domestic act. The kind of thing a woman does when she needs her hands occupied and her mind quieted. She gathered his clothes from the bedroom chair. The jacket he had worn the day before was among them. She checked the pockets the way you do before washing. Automatic. Thoughtless. Her hand closed around an envelope, then around a folded paper behind it. She stood in the laundry room and read the mortgage letter first. She did not understand every line. Bertie said she read it twice, slowly, her lips not moving, but her eyes going back to the top when she finished. She understood enough. Her name was not on it. Her mother's was. And the language in it was not the language of a routine correspondence. The transfer record was worse. Not because it explained everything. It did not. because it explained just enough: amounts, dates. A name she did not recognize moving through accounts structured in increments too deliberate to be accidental. She called Leroy. He did not answer. She called again. The second call rang longer before it stopped. She stood in her kitchen holding both pieces of paper and did not move for a long time. Bertie said the kitchen light stayed on and Shalene's shadow did not shift for nearly 10 minutes. Then she put the papers on the counter, got her keys, did not change out of what she was wearing. She did not call me. I want you to understand that her first instinct was not to call her mother. It was to go to her mother's house, to stand where she had always stood when the world stopped making sense. She turned onto my street and saw the moving truck. That house was mine. I want to be clear about that, not defensively, just truthfully. Shalene and Leroy had their own home, had lived in it since they married. The house on Calder Street was the one I bought before either of my daughters was born, the one I painted and repainted as they grew, the one I sat in alone after they both left, and made my peace with the quiet. It was mine to sell. I owed no one notice of that. I owed no one permission. Bertie called me at 10:30. She had watched Shalene pull up and sit in her car for 20 minutes without getting out. Bertie said she almost went over immediately, but something told her to wait. She understood, without being told, that some moments need their full length before anyone interrupts them. Eventually, Shalene got out of the car. The moving crew was still working. A few pieces of furniture, boxes from the back rooms, the last of what I had not taken earlier in the week. One of the movers met her at the door. Bertie could not hear what was said, but she watched Shalene's face receive it. The property had been sold. The mover was kind about it. Bertie was certain of that. He stepped aside and let her in. I have imagined that walk many times since. She would have gone to the kitchen first. She always went to the kitchen first in every home she entered. A habit she developed so young, cannot remember when it started. That kitchen was where I taught her to make her grandmother's rice, where she sat on the counter at 14 telling me about a boy who had not called, where she cried the morning of her wedding because she was happy and did not know what else to do with it. Empty now. The walls, the same color. Everything else gone. The hallway next. Her school photographs had hung there for 20 years in mismatched frames. I never got around to replacing because she always said she liked them that way. The hooks were still in the wall. Nothing on them. Her bedroom last. I know she went there last because Bertie said she was inside for a long time before anything happened. The bedroom was where she went when things were too large for the rest of the house. It always had been. I had sat on the edge of that bed more nights than I could count. Through fevers, through heartbreak, through the specific grief of being 17 and believing the world had singled you out for difficulty. I had sat there and I had not fixed anything. I had only stayed. The room was empty and I was not in it. Bertie crossed the street when the movers stepped outside for a break. She knocked on the open front door and found Shalene in the hallway, one hand resting flat against the wall where the photograph hooks were. Bertie took her hand. She said what I had asked her to say if this moment ever came. Not a speech, not an explanation. Just the one thing I needed Shalene to carry out of that house. Your mother loved you every single day, even the days you made it hard. Bertie told me later that Shalene did not respond. She walked back to the bedroom and sat down on the floor. She stayed there for a while. Then her phone came out. She called Sandra. The first time in months. I was still on the back porch when I heard Sandra's phone ring in the kitchen. Sandra took the call in the kitchen. I stayed on the porch. I did not move closer to the door. I did not need to hear every word. I needed to let that conversation be what it was, without my presence shaping it. Some things between sisters have to breathe without a mother in the room. I watched the birds instead. Listened to the sprinkler down the block that had been running every morning since I arrived. Drank what was left of my coffee, even though it had gone completely cold. Sandra was in there for 19 minutes. When she came back out, she sat down in her chair and looked at the yard for a moment before she spoke. I have learned over many years not to rush Sandra when she is organizing what she needs to say. She does not waste words, and she does not deliver them before they are ready. She found more documents at the house, Sandra said. After she left here, she went back home. His office. She went through it properly this time. I nodded. His phone is still going to voicemail. She has called him 14 times. 14. I noted that without comment. She knows something is wrong, Sandra continued. Not the full shape of it yet, but enough. She used the word trapped. She said she feels like she is standing in a room and the walls have just moved and she cannot figure out when it happened. I looked at my hands around the cold mug. What did you tell her? Sandra was quiet for a moment. I told her one thing. I told her about the divorce consultation. The yard was very still. How did she receive it? She didn't say anything for a long time, long enough that I checked the line to make sure she was still there. Sandra turned to look at me. Then she asked me if you knew. I did not respond to that. We both already knew the answer. I told her yes, Sandra said. She asked me when. A pause. I told her you had known for a while. The sprinkler down the block finished its cycle. The yard went quieter. Then she asked me if you still came to her party knowing that. I looked out at the garden, a row of plants Sandra had been tending since spring, green and unhurried, growing on their own schedule without being forced. What did you say? I asked. Sandra's voice was even. I told her you brought her the car she always wanted. I did not trust myself to speak for a moment. Not because I was breaking, I was not breaking, but because some truths, when they are said out loud by someone else, land differently than they do inside your own head. I had known why I brought that car. I had known it every mile of that 11-minute drive, but hearing Sandra say it, plainly, without decoration, made it real in a way that required a moment. I took that moment. She was quiet again after that, Sandra said. A different kind of quiet, not shock, more like something settling. We sat with that. Then Sandra said, she asked me something else. I looked at her. She asked if you would talk to her. The question sat between us on that porch like weather. I looked through the kitchen window at the empty table where we had spread the documents 2 nights ago, at the chair where I had signed the first paper while Shalene's voice was still in the air. Sandra was watching me. I turned back to the yard, and I was already looking at her when she turned to the window to find my face. I sat with the decision for a long time before I made it. Not because I was uncertain, because some decisions deserve to be sat with. Because a woman who moves through everything at the same speed eventually stops being able to tell the difference between what requires urgency and what requires patience. This required patience. I thought about Shalene at 4 years old, the particular weight of her when she fell asleep on my shoulder, her breath evening out, her hand still loosely holding the collar of my shirt, even in sleep. The absolute trust of a small child who has never had reason to question whether she is held. I thought about her in that parking lot. The nod, the speech delivered in her party voice while 30 people watched. I thought about the phone call, I love you, I always have. And the fact that both times I said it, I meant it without reservation. I called Lysander first. He confirmed what I needed to hear. Leroy had been formally contacted. He had retained his own attorney, a detail that told me everything about which direction he had decided to move in. His accounts were under review pending the investigation's outcome. He had not returned home. Shalene was alone in that house. Lysander also confirmed the estate restructuring was fully insulated. The protected trust was sealed. No spouse could access or claim it regardless of marital status during any future proceedings. Whatever Leroy had mapped out in his mind as the financial reward for 4 years of careful positioning, he would find nothing there with his name near it. Not 1 cent, not 1 line. I thanked Lysander and ended the call. Then I got the notepad from Sandra's kitchen drawer and I sat down at the table and I wrote. 3 pages. I will not tell you everything I said in those pages. Some of it was only for Shalene, and some of it was only for the version of me that needed to say it in order to be done with carrying it. But when I reached the last paragraph, I read it back to myself, quietly. The way you read your own handwriting, finding the places where the pen slowed, where the thought arrived before the words did. Then I read it aloud to Sandra. She was standing in the doorway. I did not look up from the page. I did not leave because I stopped loving you. I paused where the sentence ended naturally. I left because I refused to let him use my love for you against both of us. Another pause. Longer. When you are ready to understand the difference, I will be here. But I will not be waiting. I will be living. I smoothed the corner of the page with my thumb. And when you come, and I believe you will, come as my daughter. I looked up then. Not as his strategy. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Mama, she said. Nothing after it. Just that. I folded the pages, slid them into an envelope, and sealed it. Sandra drove to Shalene's house that afternoon. She did not call ahead. She let herself through the front gate, left the envelope on the kitchen counter, and walked back out without waiting. She told me later that Shalene was in the house. She could hear movement upstairs. She did not call out. She simply left it and came home. When she pulled into her driveway, she called me. It's there, she said. I was already in the kitchen making dinner when she walked back in. I know, I said. Now we wait. Shalene's hand found the envelope 2 hours later. She did not open it immediately. She stood at the kitchen counter with her palm flat against it. That was where she stayed when Bertie's light went off across the street. 3 weeks passed between the letter and the doorbell. I did not count the days, not exactly, but I was aware of them the way you are aware of weather moving through. I had settled into my new place properly by then. Not just occupying it, actually living in it. Curtains I had chosen myself. A kitchen organized the way I wanted without compromise. Mornings that began at the hour I decided and moved at the pace I set. The space was smaller than Calder Street. I had chosen that deliberately. I did not need square footage. I needed rooms that were entirely mine. There was one photograph on the wall in the hallway. My 2 daughters, years before any of this. Shalene is laughing at something outside the frame. Sandra is looking at the camera with that steady gaze she has had since she was 9 years old. I had put it up the first week. Not as sentiment exactly, as a true record of what I was working toward. Leroy's situation had moved in the weeks since the letter. Charges had been formally filed. The investigation had reached the point where the regulatory authorities' findings were sufficient to proceed. His attorney was managing the response, which told me everything about how much there was to respond to. The marriage was over in every legal sense. Shalene had retained her own attorney, and the proceedings had begun quietly, without theater. She had not contacted me directly since Sandra delivered the letter. I had not contacted her. We were both, I think, understanding that the next move required the right conditions. Forced reconciliation is just another performance. What I had written in that letter was an invitation, not a summons. The doorbell rang on a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen. I set down what I was holding, walked to the door, and opened it. Shalene was standing on the other side. She was not dressed for an occasion, no performance in how she had put herself together. She looked like a woman who had gotten up, gotten in her car, and driven over before she could talk herself out of it. She had lost some weight. Her eyes were clear, but tired in the way that follows weeks of reckoning rather than weeks of rest. She did not ask to come in. "I read the letter," she said. I waited. I didn't know. Her voice was steady. She had clearly said these words to herself many times on the drive over. "About any of it. What he was doing to you. To Sandra." She stopped, started again in a different place. "I thought you were the problem. I let him tell me that for 4 years, and I chose to believe it because it was easier than looking at what he actually was." "I know," I said. Her jaw moved. "I'm so sorry, Mama." I looked at my daughter, this woman I had known since before she had language, since before she had a name, since she was nothing but a presence making itself known. And I saw what 4 years of being someone's instrument had cost her. It was written in the tired behind her eyes, in the way she was standing on my porch without asking for anything. Just standing there, offering what she had, which right now was only the truth and the willingness to say it out loud. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. "I just made coffee." She sat at my kitchen table, the new one, the one she had never seen before, and wrapped both hands around the mug the way her sister does, the way I do, the way the women in our family have always held hot things. She looked up at me. "What happens now?" I looked back at her, steady, clear, taking all the time I needed. "Now," I said, "we start from the truth." My daughter asked me what happened now, and I did not answer quickly, because the old version of me would have tried to fix the silence before it settled. I let it settle. I let her sit at my new kitchen table with both hands around that mug, looking smaller than I remembered and more honest than she had been in years. Then I told her the truth. Now we stop pretending love can survive without truth. She looked down when I said it, not because she disagreed, because she finally understood that every soft thing between us had been carrying something hard underneath it. The months after that did not move like a miracle. They moved like real life: paperwork, meetings, attorneys, credit disputes, statements written carefully because feelings do not clear records. Sandra's name was restored slowly, one correction at a time. Accounts were closed, false entries challenged. Her credit report began looking like hers again, not like something a man had dragged his fingers through and walked away from. Leroy faced consequences the way men like him hate most. Not through shouting, not through spectacle, but through documents that outlived every excuse he tried to make. Shalene left that house, not dramatically, quietly. She found a smaller place on the other side of town, close enough for rebuilding but far enough from the version of herself that had let a man teach her cruelty in her own mother's direction. She and I speak now. Not every day, not like before, but honestly. And I have learned there is a difference between repairing and rebuilding. Repairing pretends you are restoring what cracked. Rebuilding admits the crack happened and chooses stronger materials. Sandra remained Sandra through all of it. The one who answered every call. The one who sat on the porch beside me without needing to fill the morning with questions. The one who delivered that letter and walked away without watching her sister break open over it. The quiet ones are always the most powerful. They do not announce their strength because they have never needed an audience to confirm it. As for me, I sleep now. Real sleep. The kind that does not keep one ear open for a phone call, one hand reaching for a problem that has not happened yet. My mornings belong to me. My kitchen is arranged the way I like it. My front door opens only to people I choose. That may not sound like victory to some folks, but peace is the first luxury a woman loses when she spends years carrying people who mistake her love for permission. There is one thing nobody knew. After everything settled, I called Crescent Auto myself. I had the Lexus delivered to Shalene's new address. Clean title, fully transferred, no note attached. She called me when she saw it, but I did not answer right away. Not because I wanted to punish her, because I needed her to stand in front of that car and understand what it had always been, a gift, not bait, not leverage, not a tool in Leroy's hands, a gift from a mother who had never stopped being one. People ask me sometimes who I am now. I tell them I'm the same woman. I just stopped apologizing for all of her. People ask me if I regret any of it. The plan, the party, the 48 hours, walking away from everything I built. I tell them the truth. I didn't walk away from anything that was mine. I walked toward everything that was.